Hey, here we go, econ students. This is Jacob Clifford. I'm so excited to help you with Microeconomics Unit 2. First of all, I hope that you and your family are safe and healthy right now. Please stay indoors and stay healthy. My family's doing good. We're okay, but I'm worried about you, and that's why I made these videos to help you out. Okay, here's what we're doing. We're doing Unit 2 today. Microeconomics Unit 2. Here's what I'm doing the College Board curriculum, the AP Economics curriculum, which looks like this. We're talking about demand, supply, price elasticity of demand and supply, and then the cross price and income elasticity. Then we'll talk about equilibrium, disequilibrium, effects of tariffs and taxes and how the government gets involved, ceilings, floors, that stuff. And then end it off with international trade. So I'm going to cover all those concepts right here today in this video for Unit 2. Now, I point out that this video is designed for people who've already learned the concepts. This is a practice video, not a reteach the concepts to you video. So I'm going to jump into it pretty quickly. And if you've never seen this stuff, because you're like self-studying for the AP contest or for your college class, it's going to be over your head, I'll be honest. It's going to be like, boom, but that's okay. Between my other videos that you know on YouTube and this practice video, you'll get help. If you didn't already know this, below me right here, this is a kind of video I've already posted on YouTube on my channel, Elasticity overview and tips. So if you need help covering any specific concept that I go really fast in this video, go back to my channel here on YouTube and go find the topic video that covers that specific topic. I also have a bunch of practice videos as well if you haven't seen that stuff. Last thing I got to tell you about, if you didn't already know, I mean, you do now because you obviously went to get it. You went and got the worksheet that goes along with today's video. It looks like this. The link is in the description below. Just follow that. It's part of something called the Ultimate Review Packet. If you haven't seen this, you're missing out because it's awesome. It includes a bunch of videos, practice questions, practice sheets, study guides, practice tests. It's designed for the AP test, but really the AP test is changing because all this craziness happening in the world. But I'm still gonna be there to help you out. But basically you want this because it's gonna help you just completely rock your class. Whatever class you're in, it's gonna help. There's a micro one, there's a macro one. There's also one for AP government and politics, world history, human geography, and there's a new calculus one. Yeah, calculus A, B, and BC both have an ultimate review packet. I'm just pointing that out because, hey, if you need more help, there's more resources to help you. But this worksheet today is free. So let's jump into it. So first things first, let me go check the health. Yeah, there you guys all are. Nice to see you. So let's start. People are excited to go. I'm excited too. You've already downloaded the worksheet that goes with this. Right now, take that worksheet out. You should have already started, actually. Let's go ahead and jump straight into Unit 2. Let's do it. Woo! I hope you're excited. Okay. So this practice sheet is designed to cover all the concepts in the entire unit. Like all of the concepts are somewhere in this thing. So I'm going to fill this out with you. If you're a teacher, you can assign this to your students if you want to. Do me a favor, please don't actually give this out to your students next year or in previous year, or years after. There's some information on the bottom. If you have questions, let me know. But teachers, please don't just give this out to your students in future years. I'm doing this for this COVID-19 thing, and I'm making this free to people so they get more help because everyone's kind of freaking out, understandably. All right, that said, let's jump into supply and demand. We're talking about ice cream cones here. A bunch of questions. They start off really easy, then get more complicated. Just to let you know before we jump into it, I saved elasticity for the end. So we're going to jump into elasticity stuff more towards the second page of this thing. So right now, don't freak out, where we are. If I'm covering everything. I'm doing a little slightly out of order than the overview you saw earlier. All right, that said, you guys excited? Are you ready to jump into this? Let's do it. Here we go. What is the equilibrium? Oh gosh. So it starts off ridiculously easy. But obviously you got to know equilibrium price and quantity is P4Q3, right? That's where supply and demand meets. That's the only place where the quantity demanded equals the quantity supplied. Everybody gets that. You know that. Before I even jump into that, I should point out, you do also know the idea of the law of demand. It creates a demand curve. There's an inverse relationship between price and quantity. When the price goes up, people buy less. Price goes down, people buy more. You know that, you got it. Same thing for supply. There is a law of supply. There's a direct relationship between price and the quantity supplied. Price goes up, producers produce more stuff. And then you end up with the supply and demand graph. You should also completely at this point understand why these curves shift. I'm going to cover that in a second, but you should know that these curves can shift around, changing the price and quantity. All right, identify the price and quantity that could be the result of an increase in the price of milk, a key resource in the production of ice cream. Okay, this is the sort of thing you're going to see on your test. Multiple choice or free response. This question starts off, we know we're looking at ice cream, all right? And then it's talking about the price of milk, and then it tells you, and it has to tell you, the teachers and professors usually don't let you just kind of guess. It tells you this is a key resource in the production of of ice cream. Milk you use to produce ice cream. So clearly we're talking about supply over here. We're not talking about demand at all. It's not going to affect consumers as much as it's going to affect the production of milk. So identify price and quantity that would be the result of an increase. An increase in the price of a resource. So the question is, what's supply going to do? There's only two options. It can either increase, shift to the right, or it can decrease, shift to the left. Well, obviously it's going to decrease. The price is going to go up and the quantity is going to go down. So it says identify our price. So we can just say, I don't know, P5Q2 could be a potential price and quantity. Now the AP test doesn't really ask you questions like that, like which one might it be? They'd ask it a different way. They'd say P5Q2 would be the result of, or could be the result of, and then they multiple choice, increase in demand, decrease in demand, increase in supply. Which reminds me, there's only 4 things that can happen. So like a lot of students freak out about supply and demand, but literally there's only 4 things. Demand can go up, demand can go down, supply can go up, supply can go down. The one thing you got to watch out for, obviously, when I said supply up, a lot of students freak out. Whoa, supply went down. No. A right is always an increase. A left is always decrease, supply and demand. So this is not an increase in supply. Don't do that. This is an increase in supply because it shifts to the right. You know that, though. I'm just preaching to the converted. You guys got this. Okay, identify a price and quantity that could be the result of a decrease in the price of popsicles, a substitute to ice cream. Again, you could probably put together that popsicles are a substitute, but the test is going to tell you specifically the relationship. It's going to say, these are substitutes. Your teacher has to do that, or else you can make an argument on, well, I don't know, are popsicles used to produce a certain type of ice cream? I don't know, whatever. Anyways, so if the price, and this is the key to this one, we know there's 5 shifters of demand, right? Tastes and preferences, number of consumers, price of related goods, substitutes and complements, income and expectations. We're talking about substitutes and complements. In this situation, it said there could be a decrease in the price of popsicles. People are going to go buy more popsicles because the price of popsicles decreased, which means they're going to go buy less ice cream. So the demand is going to fall. So I'm going to say P2Q1 would be a correct answer for that one. I also want to go back up here and point out that P6 and I'm going to write or P6 Q1 would be a potential right answer as well. In other words, there's multiple right answers for these 2 questions. No doubt about it, right? Because it could be, the first one, for this one, supply could have shifted here, or it could have shifted here, or all the way up here, I guess. And then demand had to fall, right? And so there's 2 potential right answers. Just understand the idea that when the supply shifts to the left, price is going to go up, quantity is going to go down. And when demand shifts to the left or demand falls, price is going to go down, quantity is going to go down compared to that original equilibrium. You know that. You got it. You're amazing. I'm excited for you. Here we go. Now we're moving into the idea of consumer producer surplus, something you totally have to be able to practice. Notice on this first page, I'm asking you to find it using this graph. Like each one of these letters represents an enclosed area. So you're finding consumer surplus, but on the next sheet, you're actually calculating consumer surplus, which is kind of like the next level. And if you've seen my videos before, that's kind of how things work. It starts off easy, and it gets harder, and a lot harder, and you just got to practice. So here we go. Identify the area of consumer surplus. Remember, consumer surplus is the difference between what you're willing to pay for something and what you did pay. And that applies to all the people who purchase ice cream. So some people were willing to pay based on the demand curve. Right? This person who's willing to pay P7, whatever price that is, they didn't pay P7, right? They paid the equilibrium price, of P4. So willing to pay, did pay, willing to pay, did pay. So identify the area of consumer surplus would be Z, S, Q, V, X, and Y. Now, obviously, it's harder to see this, and that's why I brought in this. So what I'm going to do is this. I'll do yellow for consumer surplus. I'm going to draw all sorts of crazy things here, but I don't want to do it all on that other graph. So this is the area of consumer surplus right there. Done. Awesome. You obviously know what producer surplus. I don't even think I asked you about it, but you should know. You should be able to find and calculate later the idea of consumer surplus and producer surplus. Producer surplus is right here. Right? Conceptually, you understand the idea, the difference between what you're willing to pay or people are willing to pay and what they did pay, all the way down here, what they're willing to sell it for based on the supply curve versus what they did sell it for, right? So it's what the price minus what people want to sell it for is the producer's surplus. And it maxes out right here. This plus this area equals the total surplus, and it doesn't get any bigger than that. You can't get more total surplus than an equilibrium. In fact, any other quantity would result in some problems. So if we have Q2, we're going to end up with something called deadweight loss, or at Q1, we're going to have deadweight loss. There's also some problems over here at Q4. We're producing too much, in this case, be too much output, which we'll get to later on. So that's the idea of consumer and producer surplus. You get that. There's no deadweight loss here. All right, cool. So let's keep going. Now, notice that consumer and producer surplus can change if I start shifting these curves around. So if I start shifting these curves out, this triangles of consumer and producer surplus are going to change. So let's start talking about that concept. Here we go. Question number 5. Identify the area of consumer surplus if supply increased, resulting in an equilibrium price of P3 Q4. So P3 Q4, supply increased, right down here. Then the question's asking, what is the area of consumer surplus? Well, that's going to include the old area we just did, ZSQ VXY. So everything we already did, plus L, M, N, R, and T. So when the supply curve shifted to the right down to here, now people who couldn't buy it before, and this is key, people who couldn't buy it before. All right, so all these individuals along this demand curve at this price couldn't get it, right? They were willing to pay something less than P4, but the price of P4, so sorry, you're out of luck, you can't buy it. But now that the supply has increased and now the price is down at P3, all these individuals who couldn't buy it before now can get it. Okay, cool. Since they can get it, that means that there's now consumer surplus that those people have, and that's equal to all the way down here, right? In fact, I'm not going to draw it on there, but I think you understand the idea. In fact, what I'll do is this. I'll put it right here. It's this triangle right here. Notice consumer surplus is a triangle, so is producer surplus. Okay, that said, let's keep going. Assume instead that the demand decreased, resulting in an equilibrium price of P3 and Q2. Right? Identify the area of producer surplus. All right, so demand decreased to P3, Q2, which is here, so demand fell. Producer surplus would be the area of KOF. KOF is the KOF is the producer surplus. Again, I know you know this, and I know many of you are like, oh, I get this stuff. By the way, if you're a macro student and you're like watching this like, oh my gosh, I don't understand all this, because you don't learn this in AP macroeconomics or college macroeconomics. This is clearly microeconomics. You do learn, real quickly, you do learn this idea of equilibrium and supply and demand, law supply, what the shifters are. You definitely understand the idea of, shifting the curve, changing equilibrium. But the second we got the question for you, you're done. You don't have to do any of this stuff. Just understand a market, how the market shifts, what the equilibrium price and quantity is, how those things shift, whoop, and you're done. Jump out of there. It maybe be nice to know ceilings and floors, like your professor might make sure you understand that idea, which we'll talk about later. But all these areas as consumer and producer surplus stuff, you don't need to know that. So just breathe if you're a macro student. If you're a micro student, don't breathe, because you definitely need to know this. This is a little harder stuff. So the area of producer surplus, we said, now notice, obviously, when the price gets lower, the producer surplus gets smaller, which makes sense, right? So producer surplus gets smaller when the price falls. Consumer surplus gets smaller when the price goes up, which totally makes sense, right? If I'm willing to pay something, and that difference between what I'm willing to pay and did pay is here, the price goes up, then my consumer surplus is going to get smaller. So when you're filling this out, make sure your result makes sense. If you thought the producer surplus was like FKOLMNV and some other area, then you realize really quickly, no, it can't be bigger than it was before. If the price fell, producer surplus would fall. Identify the area of consumer surplus if the price ceiling is pace. Okay, now we switch gears. In fact, I'm going to draw some lines right here. So questions 1 through 3, we're talking about, do you understand how a market works and is and shifts? 4, 5, and 6, we're talking about consumer surplus. Easy question here, consumer surplus. And then what happens when there's a shift? What happens to consumer and producer surplus? And then now we're starting to get the government involved with ceilings and floors. You're totally going to need to be able to do this, so let's do it. Identify the area of consumer surplus if a price ceiling is placed at P2. First thing you got to do whenever you see a ceiling or a floor is ask yourself, is it binding? Does it have an effect? So price ceilings always go below equilibrium. A ceiling cannot go above. I mean, you can put it above, but it has no effect. It's not binding. So this is a price ceiling at P2, which is right here. I'm not going to write on this, but I'll put it on this one. So a P2 price ceiling is right here. The government is saying, listen, price can't go over P2. It's illegal. It's impossible. You can't have the price go over P2. And that's binding because it's below equilibrium. If it was up here at P6, it would not be binding. The government would be like, listen, you can't charge more than P6. And we're like, well, we're not trying to. The price is P4. So you can't put a ceiling above equilibrium to be binding. So here's the price ceiling. The question is, where is consumer and producer surplus? Well, first thing, let's make sure I had that right. It was at P2. Yep, so P2. Notice that Q1 is the quantity produced. This is going to be the quantity supplied. That's the supply curve. We can't have Q2, Q3, Q4, Q5 produced because producers are stopping at Q1, which is one of the problems of a price ceiling. When the prices can't rise, producers have no incentive to produce more. And so right here, that's the new quantity supplied. I'll actually write that. There's the quantity supplied. The quantity demand is here. Yes, people want Q5, but they're not going to get Q5, and that creates the idea of a shortage. The difference between the quantity demanded and the quantity supplied in this case is a shortage. More people want to buy it. Price is really low. People want to buy it, but price is really low. Producers don't want to produce it. You've got a shortage. Next question, where's the consumer and producer surplus? Well, obviously, so this is where things get a little tricky. This was a regular, unregulated market. Now, consumer surplus is going to be here and only here. The reason why is you can't have consumer surplus from units that were never produced or sold. So, you know, if you kind of drew consumer surplus anywhere over here and shaded this area, it wouldn't make sense because we stopped at Q1. There's no more than Q1 output being produced. So you can't have consumer surplus be any other place. Producer surplus also makes sense. The government's keeping the price artificially low, and when the price is low, producer surplus would be smaller, so it would be that area right there, which means we have an area left over. And what is that area left over? You got it. It is dead weight loss. Dead weight loss. Hopefully you can see over my shoulder. Where is it? Is it over? No, where is this? There it is. Dead weight loss. If you see my video, it's right there. There is the skull that talks about the idea of dead weight loss. This is lost consumer and producer surplus that would normally exist. It's total surplus that disappears because we're not producing the amount society wants. This quantity here is the quantity socially optimal. Society wants this. This will make more sense in Unit 6 when you talk about markets that are actually not socially optimal with this thing called externalities. But for now, just understand, this is where we want to produce. It maximizes total surplus. Consumer and producer surplus are as big as they can get with this market. Over here, society wants Q3, but we're only producing Q1 because the government won't let the price go up. And the result is this area of dead weight loss. Okay, cool. Dead weight loss. There it is. Now, going back to the question, identify the area of consumer surplus for a price ceiling. If the price ceiling is at P2, it is Z, S, V, L, and K. And then might as well, that's the consumer surplus. For the producer surplus, just write it down. Why not? Producer surplus is F, and then we can also identify the deadweight loss if we wanted to, but it didn't ask that. So remember, AP, if you're taking an AP class, AP stands for answer the prompt. That's it. Answer the question that it's asking. Don't answer any other questions, just what it's asking. So it didn't ask for producer surplus. I'm leaving it out. In this case, I'm putting it on there just so you understand. The F equals F. That's what I wrote, really. Price, the producer surplus would be F in this case. Okay, identify the area of concern. Here, I'm gonna let you do number 8. I'm gonna check my, so do number 8. If you haven't already done so, try number 8, and I'm gonna check the comments, see how you guys are doing. Good, I wanna make sure my audio is working, everything's working good. Okay. So for number 8, here we go. Identify the area of consumer surplus if the price ceiling is placed at P5. Ooh, so that would be the whole idea of ZSQ, right? Wrong. No. Why? Because you can't put a price ceiling above equilibrium. Remember, I just said that like 3 minutes ago. You can't do that. It's not binding. There is an answer for this. So if you put the answer as 0, that would be wrong too. All it is ZSQ VXY. It is the same as regular normal equilibrium. When there's a price ceiling above equilibrium, it has no effect on the market, so the consumer surplus would be exactly the same. There'd be no change in the consumer surplus. So if the price ceiling's at P5, we're still selling things at P4, consumer surplus does not change. Consumer surplus only starts changing when the price ceiling is below equilibrium or a floor is above equilibrium. You get the idea. So that was a trick question. Yes, I know I was being tricky. But in number 8, I was trying to see if you fall for that. Remember, the first rule, if you ever see a ceiling or floor, and by the way, the reason why I'm bringing it up is because teachers love to do this kind of stuff. Professors and teachers love to try to trick you by asking a question they've said 100 times that you know better, right? So if you fell for that, be careful. You'll never fall for it again. Whenever you see ceiling or floor on your test, first question should be, is it binding? Does it have an effect? A ceiling has to be below, a floor must be above. All right, here we go. Identify the area of deadweight loss if a price floor is placed at P6. Okay, so P6, woo, I'm gonna go over here. Now, if a price floor, and I shouldn't do this on the same graph, but I'm saving this for later stuff. So just bear with me. If instead there's a floor, so there's a floor up here, this will be the area of consumer surplus, right? Except this down here would be the area of producer surplus, right? So basically these would switch, which totally makes sense. And now, if the price is higher, consumer surplus would be smaller. And if the price is up there, then producer surplus would include this area, but the deadweight loss is exactly the same. So the reason why is we're still producing Q1. If we're producing Q1, deadweight loss is exactly the same area. So let's make sure we identify it. Area of deadweight loss at Q1 is QXY MNO. There is no right order for this, by the way. So if you're freaking out, like, wait, I have XYQMNO. It's all the same. It's just areas. So this area here is the deadweight loss. Deadweight loss is always identifying the lost consumer and producer surplus that would normally exist when a market is at equilibrium in a competitive market like this. Okay, let's keep moving. Now, all these questions here, so this section was talking about ceilings and floors. Okay, so again, recap. First part, identifying equilibrium and shifting the curve. Next part was identifying consumer and producer surplus and then shifting the curve, seeing what it looks like. Next part was talking, was talking about ceilings and floors. Now we're switching over to taxes. Now I have videos that explain the whole idea of taxes in a lot of detail. You definitely have to practice this, the idea of an excise tax, a per unit tax. If you haven't done so, start trying questions 10, 11, and 12. But I want you to make sure you understand what a tax is. Obviously, you know what taxes are, but taxes affect supply, and you know the $2 tax, in this case, a $2 tax on producers, it's on every single unit produced. So instead of charging $5, now I have to charge $7. And instead of charging $10, now I have to charge $12. So the way that would actually look like on the graph, and I'm going to draw it on here first. First of all, okay, assume a per unit tax was placed on ice cream resulting. All right, the way they did this, and I ask it different in the next page. The way I did this though is P6Q1 is the new price. That means supply must have shifted all the way over here, right? Which is kind of crazy, but there's a tax that occurred, causing the supply curve to shift to the left, a per unit tax. Price is P6, quantity is Q1, because that's what it says, P6Q1. Identify the area of consumer surplus. We already know that. The area of consumer surplus, the area of consumer surplus is Z, all right? Assume that the per unit tax was placed on ice cream resulting in equilibrium price of P6Q1. So this is just the same question over again. I just didn't want you to be confused. So same thing, but identify the area of deadweight loss. It's the same deadweight loss as before. QXYMNO. It's just the same deadweight loss. Again, one more time. Notice this is the third time we've done it. With a ceiling, the quantity was Q1, deadweight loss is that orange area. With a floor, if the floor is up here and we're producing Q1, area is deadweight loss. Over here, same exact situation. We're looking at deadweight loss, which is right there. Now, the thing that's different, this is the part that's different, is this next part. So if you're thinking like, oh, that's pretty easy. Yeah, it's easy, but it starts getting tricky. Assume there's a per unit tax placed on ice cream resulting in P6Q1, so same thing over again. Identify the area of tax revenue. Ooh, that's exciting. So tax revenue, where is the box of tax revenue? Because there's this tax that's being placed. Where is that on here? Right? Now, when I say a box, it's these letters. So these letters represent the tax revenue. Well, notice the new price is here, right? This is the price that consumers pay, right? In fact, let me zoom in a little bit because this is going to get exciting. So the old price was here. Supply shifted to the left. The question told us the new price and quantity P6, Q1. This is the price consumers pay. But that's not the price that producers get to keep. Remember, there's a tax. There's a wedge in between the consumer who gave the producer the money and the amount that the producer actually keeps, because some of that money goes to the government. So that, if you go all the way down, vertical distance, down to the old supply curve, this is the price that producers actually get to keep. This vertical distance between these two supply curves is the amount of the tax per unit. It'll make a little bit more sense. So if like right now you're like, what? It'll make more sense when we get over here in the next question. But I just want you to understand, for now, understand that the price that consumers pay is not equal to the price that producers get to keep. So let's answer the question. Where's consumer surplus? Well, you know that. Consumer surplus is here. Where's deadweight loss? Well, you also know that. Deadweight loss is here because we're producing Q1. The tax box that goes to the government must be right here. And I'll shade it in with blue. This area is not producer surplus. This is the tax revenue that goes to the government. This right here is producer surplus. So now you can see the difference between these. So I'll zoom out. You can see the difference. You can see the difference over here. When we had this ceiling, this was all consumer surplus, producer surplus, deadweight loss. Over here now, we don't have all this being producer surplus because remember, the producer's not keeping all that money. So supply shifted to the left. Whoop, there we go. There's this deadweight loss because we're assuming Q3 was the amount society actually wanted, but we're producing Q1. So we're making an assumption there, but we can make that in this question. We're not in unit 6 yet. And then so here you can see that's the price. That's the price producers receive. Let's go answer those questions. And here they are. Assume per unit tax is placed. Identify the area of tax revenue. Tax revenue would be S, V, L, and K. There's your letters that represent the idea of the producer. I'm sorry, this is the tax revenue. So tax revenue to the government. Now, the way I explain this to students, I think this makes more sense if you think of it this way. In all these situations, until we got to here, there were only two people involved, right? This is my horrible drawing of two people. There were consumers and producers. Consumers and producers. Consumers gave the money to producers. Producers got to keep that money. Now, all of a sudden, the government comes in. This is Uncle Sam with his hat on. And he shows up. And now there's three individuals involved in this transaction when you add in this tax. There's the consumers, right, who are paying a certain amount of money. There's the producers who get some of that money. And then there's some that goes to the government. All right, number 13. Assume instead. Okay, now we're switching gears again. Okay. Now here in question, so okay, here, recap, I love recaps. So, all right, recap so you understand what I'm doing, there's a reason why I'm teaching it in the order that I am. Supply and demand shifting, consumer and producer surplus, ceilings and floors, including watching out, making sure you remember, always check if it's binding or if it's not binding, a ceiling or floor. Per unit taxes, so when the supply shifts left, I left out subsidies. I could do the same thing here with subsidies. I didn't. It's not asked as often, but understand it's a subsidy is when supply shifts to the right. Now I'm switching gears to something completely different. The idea that let's say we can get this product, ice cream, at a cheaper world price. And so here it says, assume instead consumers can get ice cream at the world price of P2. So I'm gonna actually use this graph up here now. So yes, domestically, in our own country, the price is normally P4, but we can go buy ice cream super cheap at a price of P2. Identify the area of consumer surplus from international trade. Okay, first thing, at P2, we are going to produce Q1. That is true, just like we saw in previous questions, right? And here, we ended up with Q1. Here, we ended up with Q1. Okay, but now it gets weird because this is only the amount we are producing domestically, right? People want at this price, Q5, but producers, domestic producers, people in our country are only producing Q1. The rest of this that would normally be a shortage is going to be imported. In other words, we're going to go buy Q5 minus Q1 goods from other countries, in this case, ice cream from their countries. And so these consumers who normally couldn't get it, remember these consumers over here, right? All these people who were willing to pay less than P4 at P4 couldn't buy it. When the equilibrium price was here, they couldn't get it. But now when the price is P2, they totally can get it, which means the area of consumer surplus would be here. What? Awesome. So this whole area represents consumer surplus, and this is the idea of the benefits of trade. When you trade with our country at a lower cost, you can go buy ice cream from their country super cheap. That means all these people who could normally not get it now get it. Now to answer the question, let's write all those letters out. Whew. Z, S, Q, V, X, Y, L, M, N, R, T, geez, K, O, G, H, I, J. Oh my gosh, L, M, N, O, P. Oh, you didn't even see me write it. So those are all, this whole area represents consumer surplus. Just so you understand, producer surplus would be this area here. And obviously, who hates international trade, right? Who thinks international trade is not particularly good? Obviously, domestic producers. Before, they used to have all this producer surplus, and now, when they got to be forced to lower the price down to what they, their competitors, other countries, would be selling it at, then now, obviously, yeah, they're making less producer surplus. It hurts domestic producers, right? But it benefits consumers. And this area here, first of all, let me back up. There's no deadweight loss. First thing I want you to notice, there's no deadweight loss here. There's no lost consumer and producer surplus. In fact, there's only more total surplus. If you put these two graphs together, you can tell, right? Here, this is just inside our own country. Here with international trade, we have more total surplus. This area here, RT, GHIJ, all this area is consumer surplus, producer surplus that did not exist before. So we actually gain that from trade, which is one of the reasons why countries trade with each other. So let's go back to the actual questions here again. Last one, it says, identify the quantity that would be imported if the world price is P2. So the quantity that imported, don't write Q1, that's the amount we're going to produce, so don't write that. Don't write Q5, because that's the amount that we want. You got to do Q5 minus Q1, this distance here that would normally exist. Normally there'd be a shortage. In fact, let me show you. Down here, when the price ceiling was placed, there was a shortage right here. Consumers wanted Q5, but we only produced Q1. There was a shortage. Yeah, but in this case, the shortage is being imported. We're bringing in the difference between what people are willing to pay and, what people are willing to pay at that low price, and we're actually producing domestically. How'd you guys do? Make this out of 14. I got 14 out of 14. Woohoo! All right, good. I better have. Right now, go ahead and write down what you got and let me know in the comments how you got 14 out of 14. Also, let me know if you need more help. What else do you need in these videos? Remember, I'm making videos every single Monday, Wednesday, and Friday of this month of April. I'm doing this because this COVID-19 junk. So here's the calendar if you haven't already seen this. We're not done, by the way. We have more things to do. So I'm just giving you a mental break here. I'm doing macro this Wednesday. I'm doing case studies on Friday. If you haven't seen the case studies, they're super cool. Seriously, basically, I break down the practical application of economics, and I give you this worksheet to answer some questions. Last time we talked about toilet paper, and if you haven't seen that video, it's pretty awesome because you think toilet paper right now is, there's a shortage of toilet paper because people are hoarding toilet paper, but it turns out an economist said, no, that's not what it is. It's something else entirely. And if you watch the case study, it'll explain exactly why toilet paper there's a shortage right now. There's a legitimate, logical reason, and it's not the illogical idea of people just hoarding and having, mountains of toilet paper around their house. So yeah, there you go. Okay, that said, like I said, let me know how you guys did. I want to go see how you guys did. I'm not going to report out, but you obviously see everything is working. You guys are awesome. So I'm just reading a little bit of what you guys are writing here on the live chat. Yeah, somebody asked a good question. He said, why would you ever, it was Ben, thanks Ben. He asked, why would you ever put a ceiling or a floor that's not binding? And the answer is, the government doesn't really know maybe equilibrium prices, or maybe things could shift. In other words, you could have a binding ceiling, and then for whatever reason, prices fall in such a way where now it's not binding anymore. So, we're just back up. This is a good time to mention all this stuff. One of the things I talk about a lot in my videos is the idea that this stuff is all academic, right? So this is like super academic. This is like understanding how markets work. In real life, it gets way more complicated, right? In real life, we teach you that there's subsidies, right? That subsidies are, designed to producers to produce more. But there's been subsidies in the past where the government paid people not to produce certain products, right? So it gets way more complicated. In a regular econ, high school, AP, 101 college level class, this is where we keep it at. So the question you asked is a good question. Why would the government ever have a non-binding ceiling or floor? It's a great question, and the answer is maybe they don't know where equilibrium is, or maybe because equilibrium changed. But basically, you just need to understand for passing your test that a floor below and a ceiling below is not binding. It does not have an effect on the market. You'll end up with the same consumer and producer surplus that you normally would have. Okay, all that being said, it is time to switch gears to practice sheet number 2. This is going to be way, way, way harder. Last time I had you actually identify the area of consumer surplus with this, right? ZSQ, that was easy. Now you got to take it to the next level and calculate the area of consumer surplus given this product. Now, in this one, I don't have like a name of the product. I'm just using some random, whatever this is. We'll say, ice cream, I guess, if you want. But now we have to do some calculations. One thing I want to point out is the AP test. For those of you who are AP students, the AP test is going to ask you to show your work. In other words, you have to write out not just, the answer is 20 or 200. You actually say, how the heck did you get 200? So you have to actually write that out, put out the equation, and write out how you actually got those numbers. So for all of these, if you don't show the work, you get 0 points. Okay, so that's it. Notice there was no work to show on these, and that's why the AP test is moving away from these kind of responses, because, for the most part, there's no work to be shown. In fact, this year particularly, because the AP test is going to 2 free responses and that's all it's going to be, it's more likely to have questions like this, because this one, obviously, you can't just text your friend, oh, the answer is ZSQ, right? This one is going to be a little harder because you have to actually show how the heck did you get 200 or 20 or whatever it is. So right now, we're going to jump into this second second set of questions. It's the same idea as before. This time, we're going to talk about shifting the curve, consumer surplus, talk about ceilings and floors, and in the end, we're going to do something about elasticity. Make sure you feel comfortable with elasticity. I'm doing only, in this case, 4 questions on elasticity, 26 through 29, but I have a whole nother practice sheet that's in the Ultimate Review Packet in Unit 2 that practices, elasticity over and over again. I'll get to it when I get to it. All right, that said, let me one more time double check the health and your comments. It looks like you guys are doing great. Matthew said he got 100 out of 14. Congratulations, that's awesome. So world price. Another good question. You guys are asking great questions. Great questions. I really should answer some of them right now, so I will. So somebody asked, a great question was the world price thing, is the world price thing we did here a macro concept or a micro concept? A great question. This is a micro concept. You'd see this on the micro, in the micro college class or the micro AP test. Yes, we're talking about international trade, which is a big concept for macroeconomics, but we're talking about individual markets here and consumer and producer surplus. That's clearly microeconomics. So this concept of a world price being at P2, definitely microeconomics if you see it in the graph. Understanding the idea that countries trade comparative advantage is something from Unit 1 that we already learned. Back up. I know you guys are leaving me questions inside the comment section thing or the live, what do I call it? The live chat. I'm not gonna be able to answer those questions right now because I can't even see that on my screen. So yeah, sorry, but I will answer those. So stay live with me. First, let's start filling out this second portion of the practice sheet. So we're looking here at number 2, used graph for a competitive market to answer the questions below. There is some assumptions there that I'm making, and if you're like a teacher or a professor, you're like, well, what about this? What about this? I want you to understand, we're talking about competitive market with no externalities. If that doesn't make sense to you because you haven't learned anything from Unit 6, don't worry about it. For now, just understand we want to produce 50 units. Society wants 50 units. That's good enough for me. I just didn't want to write all that stuff out. All right, here we go. What is the quantity demanded and the quantity supplied at price 13? In fact, let me pull this up. Okay. All right, at price 13, which is right here, the quantity demanded. Notice that we obviously are not at equilibrium. We're at disequilibrium. Your test could start off with something this easy. So for 13, the quantity demanded is 20. Quantity demanded equals 20. And the quantity supplied equals 80. Now, this doesn't require you to show any work. There's no work to show on this one. But I just wanted to start off with an easy question to make you feel good about yourself. Okay, yeah, I got this stuff before the hard stuff starts. I want you to also notice at price 13, price is above equilibrium, so there's going to be a surplus. Society wants 20 units at that high price, right? 20 units. But at that high price, producers want to produce a whole lot more. They want to produce 80. So at the high price, consumers are like, I don't really want to buy it. Quantity demanded falls, right? That's the law of demand. But the quantity supply went up. That distance between the two of these, that's the idea of a surplus. In fact, I'm going to write that. There's a surplus. There's a trick I tell my students. When the price is below, it's shortage, right? Shortage. Shortage is here. There's a surplus. We're at equilibrium. There's no shortage. There's no surplus. So again, surplus, shortage, equilibrium. All right. Could an increase in supply result in an equilibrium price of $12 and 30 units? So right here, can an increase in supply result in that? The answer is no, it can't. And there's an explain. Now, professors, teachers, the AP test, your final exam in your college level class, you see the word explain, you've got to explain. If you wrote no, you get no points. Why? Like, the answer is no, but why? There's multiple ways to explain it, but basically when supply increases, price will go down, quantity will go up. Now, obviously, I'm not writing it out, but you should understand, and you would write it out on your test. An increase in supply would result in the price going down and the quantity go up, not the price going up and the quantity going down. In this question, all I'm trying to figure out, if you fell for what I said in the last video, did you go, the supply increased? Yeah, supply increased. Yeah, that could happen. If you said that, you're making the classic mistake. The classic mistake is thinking supply increase is a shift upward. It's not upward. A supply increase is it. Now, you might be thinking, if you're really smart, maybe a double shift could do it, right? Couldn't we have an increase in demand and also an increase in supply? You could do that, but a double shift won't work either. And the reason why is first of all, you should know this. There's a double shift rule. Whenever both curves shift at the same time, like if they go like this or like this, whenever these curves shift at the same time, one of these, either price or quantity, is going to be indeterminate. So if supply increases, and let's say demand also increases, then it looks like, price kind of stayed the same. It stayed there at 10, but it depends on how much that demand shifted by. Does this make sense? Can you understand what I'm doing with this? I mean, hope someone just came to this video and is like super confused. But yeah, did the price go down or the price go up? Well, it depends on how severe this demand or this supply shift is. But what you can't do is you cannot end up over here with the price going up and the quantity going down. Not possible. You can end up with a situation where the price went up with a double shift. You can have a situation where the price went down with a double shift, but you can't end up with a situation with both the price going up and the quantity going down. And that's why the answer is no, you can't end up being there. Now, that's just a double shift sort of question, or, not really. It's more like a, do you understand shifting question? But I just want to make sure you got that. Now we're going to jump into the calculations. So here we go. Calculate the consumer. Now I'm going to slow down. By the way, if you wonder why I'm like this, like I totally geek out about this econ stuff. And I get like, if you're a teacher and you've been to one of my workshops, if you met me in person, I'm actually like this in real life. Like I'm not like hamming up for the camera. I just get overly excited about economics. And that's one of the reasons why I talk so fast too. And I'm sorry if I talk too fast. I'm going to try to slow down during this section. Right now, you should have already tried some of these and make sure how you did. Make sure to show your work. But let's jump into it. I'm going to slow down just a little bit to make sure you guys are feeling comfortable. Calculate the consumer surplus at the equilibrium price. All right, we know the equilibrium price is 10. We know the area of consumer surplus is up here. And so now the question isn't where is it? The question is how to calculate it. Well, just remember it's 1/2 base times height, which is the area of a triangle. So we know the area is a triangle. It's basically a rectangle cut in half. So calculate the consumer surplus. It would be 15, which is here, down to the equilibrium price of 10, which is, I'll put dollars because it is dollars. So 15 minus 10 times 20, or sorry, the total quantity is 50, all cut in half. So this is, I'm not really following this equation the same sort of way. It'd be 1/2, the base would be 50, the height would be 15 minus 10, which would be 5. But you understand the idea, 1/2 base times height is the equation for area of a triangle. So for this one, it's going to be 5 times 25, which is 125. 125 was the answer for the consumer surplus. Now, by the way, don't cheat, but understand each one of these boxes, right? Each one of these boxes represent 10. So, so right here from 7 to 8 and then 10. So each one of these boxes. So technically you could add up all those different boxes. Your college professor might not have boxes set up and it might not be this pretty. In fact, you didn't need the number 12 or 8 to answer it. So, and maybe you wouldn't have all these boxes in the first place. And so really don't do it that way, but it's a good way to double check your answer, right? So we know there's gonna be 12.5 boxes here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12.5. Okay, 12.5 boxes, we got it. Now don't do that, but I just wanna make sure you understand this idea. There's a reason for that number. It has to do with that area of that triangle right there. All right, keep going. Calculate the consumer surplus if a decrease in supply results in an equilibrium price of $12. All right, supply has decreased, resulting in a new price, which is right here, $12. Consumer surplus is the difference, is that obviously consumer surplus got smaller. The number we're gonna come up with has to be less than 125. So it's 1/2 base times height. We said it's 15 minus 12, I'll leave out the dollar signs, times the new quantity is 30, cut in half. So it's 3 times 15, 45. 45 was the right answer. That's the consumer surplus. That triangle right here, let's just make sure that's right. So this is 10, 20, 30, 45. Yeah, I can calculate and get that too, just to double check my answers. So notice, if you came up with 145, something's wrong, right? If you're saying consumer surplus got bigger, that doesn't make any sense. Obviously, the price increased. When the price increases, consumer surplus has to get smaller. All right, here we go. Calculate the producer surplus if an increase in demand results in an equilibrium price of $12. All right, now something completely different. So this is, ignore this other thing, and now we're doing this new situation. If the price ended up being $12 because demand increased, right? So now it's here. Producer surplus must be this big giant triangle. Can you see that? Right here, right? So now we're doing a different triangle. This one's gonna be $12 minus 5. So that is the height. The base is all the way out to 70, right? Times 70 cut in half. That should do it. So this is gonna be 12 minus 5. Oh, it's going to be $7. Forgive my horrible handwriting, and I'm not doing it like you probably should. You should write this whole thing out. $7 times 35, that's gonna do it. So 7 times 35, that's going to be 245. Okay, so 7 times 25. So make sure you understand what I did. So understand that first. So this is the producer surplus. Here is the giant triangle we're doing. And the reason why we're doing it all the way out here is because we said this, the demand increased. When the demand increased, now we end up with a more produced surplus. I can keep doing this with everything. I can have, demand go down, demand go up, supply go down. And I can ask you for different consumer surpluses. I just understand the idea that when the curve shifts, like we did earlier in this other one, remember when we did this one, we identified different areas when the curve shifts of consumer and producer surplus right here. Make sure you can do the same thing except do the actual calculations. Okay, that being done, let's jump in to the next one. Calculate, all right, ready for this next one? In fact, do me a favor, do number 20 before I get a chance to and get an idea of what question 20's answer might be. And I'm gonna check really quick the health of the live stream, make sure it's doing great, which it looks like it is. Someone asked me if I'm wearing my AC/DC belt buckle. I am not. I'm wearing my pajamas. Don't tell anybody. Are you guys wearing a lot of pajamas? Right, because of the coronavirus? More pajamas wearing than I've ever worn in my entire life. Okay, here we go. Except for college. Calculate the consumer surplus if a price ceiling is placed at $8. Oh, no, I'm sorry, 20. Calculate the deadweight loss if a decrease in demand results in an equivalent price of $8. So if the demand falls down to $8, the deadweight loss is going to be a grand total of 0. None. There is no deadweight loss. Yes, I'm trying to be tricky again. If that threw you off, sorry. The demand fell, and when demand falls, there is no deadweight loss. So there's no deadweight loss because we are at equilibrium. And when you're at equilibrium. Now, earlier I did say, I know, so if you're freaking out about this, don't. Earlier I did say, yes, society wanted 50. That's where we were before. But now it said demand has fallen and there's a new price down here at 8. And when we're at that new quantity, 30, now society only wants 30. Why? Because people don't want 50 anymore. So the answer is 30. There's no deadweight loss. Now you're tempted probably to go, oh, this triangle right here, and you're doing the calculation of that triangle. That's not deadweight loss. That would only exist if there was a ceiling or a floor or a tax or something else other than a normal natural equilibrium shift taking place, right? So there's no deadweight loss that occurs when a demand curve shifts from an equilibrium or a supply curve from equilibrium to a new equilibrium, unless there's an externality, which you haven't learned about yet. That's Unit 6 stuff. But understand there is no deadweight loss here, right? So in other words, think of it this way. There's no deadweight loss when society's getting what they want. Before they wanted 50, demand fell. Now they're only getting 30, which is what they wanted in the first place because they didn't want to buy as many because demand fell. And so, yeah, there's no deadweight loss. When, however, the government's preventing the price from going up or preventing the price from going down or putting a tax on a product that would normally not have a tax, those would all result in deadweight loss. Tricked ya, didn't I? Okay, calculate the consumer surplus if the price ceiling is placed. Okay, we're switching gears and draw some lines here. So here we go. For this first part, this is just old-fashioned shifting, understanding the idea of shifting the curve. This next part was talking about consumer surplus. Now we're switching gears, calculating with ceilings and floors. Now we already know where they are because we did it earlier, ceilings and floors. The question now is, can you calculate it? So calculate the consumer surplus if the price ceiling is placed at $8. All right, here's $8. First question, is it binding? Remember, you have to ask that question first. Is it binding? Yes. A ceiling below equilibrium at 8 is binding. Identify consumer surplus if it is. So there's the first thing I want you to understand is you know where it is. We did it earlier. It's right here. It's this yellow area. But how do you calculate that area, right? Well, in this case, you're going to have to calculate the area of the small little triangle. I don't want to draw it on here. So I'm going to grab another. Give me 2 seconds here. Yeah, I'll do it on this one. So we said the price ceiling, it's a ceiling, right? Yeah, price ceiling is placed at 8. Can you see this? Perfect. Price ceiling is placed at 8. We're producing 30 units. We can't have any consumer surplus. You can't use number 40, 50, 60, 70. You can't use any of these numbers because we're only producing 30 units. Consumer surplus is going to be this whole area here, which we know looks like that. Right? How the heck do you get that area? Well, it's really just two areas. It's this triangle here, right? Plus this rectangle here. Add those two suckers together, that's you get your consumer surplus. It'd be a lot easier just to calculate the producer surplus, but it didn't ask you that for that. It's asking for the consumer surplus if that price ceiling. So here we go. To get the right answer, first let's go to that little triangle. In fact, I'm going to do it on this page so it's a little easier to see for you. So it's 15 minus 12. I'm sorry. I'm kind of, yeah. The AP test is kind of weird. You want to write this stuff out. When it says explain, like, you understand, like, do the work, and so it sees your work. In this case, I can just skip that and say, okay, it's 3, which is the height, times the base, which we said is 30, cut in half, right? So 3 times 30, which is basically 3 times 15, it's 45. There it is. We already know that because we did that question earlier. So it's 45, but that's just this triangle right here. We got to get the rest of it. 12 minus 8, which is 4. Okay, $4 times 30, which is 4 times 30 is 120. That would be the rest of it, which is here. Add up the 2, you get 165. That would be your right answer, 165. So consumer surplus is 165. Again, I mean, I know I'm breaking rules here. You have to put this work next to your actual question. but I want you to be able to see it on this one. So you understand, I would transport that over if this was an actual test, especially on a fear response. Note to self really quick, if you're taking the AP test, they actually give you a graph. You can draw all over the graph, but you can't write any answers on the graph they give you. It actually tells you don't write above this section. So you have to, whatever you write down off to the side, make sure you write it down over here. The answer, though, I want you to understand is 165. That is the consumer surplus, which makes sense, right? It's this area that's now including this other area that wasn't consumer surplus because the price is now artificially low. Let's move on. What would the equilibrium price and quantity be if okay, hold on, stop. So calculate the consumer surplus at a price ceiling. That's it for ceilings and floors. I need you to understand that you should be able to do the same thing for calculating producer surplus. So can you calculate that? Make sure you understand also how to calculate deadweight loss. So I did the hardest of the 3 calculations. I had you calculate consumer surplus, but make sure you understand how to calculate producer surplus. Make sure to calculate the area of deadweight loss. Each of these are just 1/2 base times height, the area of a triangle. All right, I'm gonna keep going. What would be the equilibrium price and quantity if a per unit tax of $2 is placed on this good? So let's go now, and I'm gonna draw over this one. This is gonna get exciting. There's a $2 tax placed on this. So forget the ceiling, forget the floor, forget the other junk. Now it's a $2 tax. Now you're tempted to go, oh, $2 tax brings us to $12, and you draw a supply curve up here. No. Remember what I said earlier, the vertical distance between the supply curve is the amount of the tax. So just go from any point, from here, this is 2, go up 1, 2. Okay, that's where we'd have to be here. From here, from 5, it would have to be to 7. From 6, it would have to be up here to 8. And you keep doing that all the way, and you find out you end up with a supply curve, which is a supply curve with the tax, which is the vertical distance between these 2 supply curves. This is a decrease in supply. In other words, when the government taxes a producer, it causes the supply curve to shift, but the amount it shifts by the vertical distance. So this was 7, right? This vertical distance right here, 7 to 5, is $2. That's a $2 per unit tax. If it was a bigger tax, it would be a bigger distance in between the two. In this case, it's only this. The reason why that matters is a lot of students jump straight to, well, if the price was 10, now the price is going to be 12 because that's $2 higher, but that's not how it works. So there it is. That's the graph it's referring to. So that's the graph I'm going to answer these questions with. What would be the equivalent price and quantity if a per unit tax is placed on the good? Well, I'll see if I can leave both of these up so you can see both. And you can't. That's okay. I can solve that problem. So I'm going to use this a lot. So I'm going to go ahead and fix this and do it this way. All right. So what would be the equivalent price and quantity for a per unit tax? The equivalent price would be $11. And that's the price. And the quantity it says here would be 40. All right, there's your answer. So that would be the price and quantity, equilibrium price and quantity right there. Next one, how much tax revenue would be generated if a $2 tax is placed on the good? Ooh, we did tax revenue boxes earlier. Remember, it's actually right here. So there's your tax revenue box we did earlier. The question is, where's that tax revenue box now? Well, notice, first of all, the new price is 11. That's the price that consumers pay. Oops, you can't see that. That's the price that consumers pay. Of that $11, how much do producers get to keep? They don't get to keep $11. They only get to keep price that producers keep is $9 because it's $2 less, the amount of the tax. This vertical distance is the amount of the tax, right? That $2. And we're talking about 40 units. So how much tax revenue would it be generated if $2 tax placed on the good? It would be $2 times 40, it would be $80. That's equals the tax revenue. Now you should also be able to identify that box. So literally label that box. And so that's what I'm going to do. This box right here is tax revenue. Now, it'd be a lot easier and nicer if I can just delete this old supply curve if I wanted to, but I'm going to leave it on here for now. This is an amount that doesn't go to consumers. It doesn't go to producers. This goes to the government. This is the tax revenue box. So, and the amount of it is $80, right? And we know that 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80. We can actually calculate that by adding up the boxes. But you understand the idea. Really, the way you got that, it's a $2 tax, horrible handwriting, I'm sorry, times $2 tax times the 40 units we're producing. So I'm kind of going quick here, But how did I get that? If your question says, obviously, explain or show your work, you'd say, well, it's a $2 tax times 40 units because the 40 units is the new quantity. 2 times 40 equals 80. Done. All right. Oh, you can't see a thing. Okay. It's all right. Would the incidence of tax of the $2 tax mostly fall on consumers or producers? Okay. Now we're getting into like the detail stuff. There's a difference between who pays the tax based on the relative elasticity of a demand curve and the supply curve. So I made a video that explains this in detail and has you practice the crud out of this idea. But understand that in this case, it is not falling on consumers or producers. It is equally on both. And the reason why is this $40 is paid by consumers and $40 is paid by producers. So of this $80 tax, half of it's paid by the consumers in higher prices, half is it paid by producers in getting less revenue. And so it's equally on both. But if I were to change the elasticity of the demand curve and make it more inelastic, then the consumers would end up paying more of that. So if we did these same calculations over again, except I had a demand curve that maybe looked like this, then I could do the calculation and find out, wait, consumers are paying this amount. Now, how did I know that consumers are paying 40? Well, take a look. If this was the old equilibrium price at equilibrium was 10, now consumers are paying $1 more. $1 more times 40, that means this top portion of this box, this tax revenue box, that's being dug into consumer surplus. Remember, consumer surplus used to be all this, but it got dug into by the amount of this tax wedge. So this top portion above the equilibrium price is paid by consumers. Below it is paid by producers. Remember, producers used to get $10, and now they're only getting $9, and so they're getting $1 less times 40 units. So in this case, the way that I did it, you can tell that it's shared by both. Now, really quickly, I wasn't planning on doing this, but I want you to see what I'm talking about it's called incidence of tax. By the way, this is like the details. This is the super details of microeconomics. Your college professor might not ask this. It is on the AP test. So let's do this. Let's make a demand curve that's more steep and a supply curve that's more flat. Here's the old equilibrium price at equilibrium, quantity equilibrium, and then I'm going to add in a tax. So stay with me here. Let's put it nice and high. Here's a tax. There it is. Here's your new equilibrium. I'll put QT for the quantity of the tax, and over here, price T for the price of it with the tax. When you go do the vertical distance thing we did earlier, vertical distance between the supply curve, so here, down to there and over, this represents the tax revenue. We've done it. This is the third time doing that. There's your tax revenue. Pretty ugly, but that's it. Notice though, it's not equal like here. On this one, you can just kind of even eyeball it. This looks like the same size as this. This one clearly does not look like that. This here has a huge, this area dug a whole lot into consumer surplus. And so this is being paid more by the consumers. Consumers have the higher incidence of tax. They're paying more of it. This is digging more into consumer surplus. Now, the area of deadweight loss, you can talk about, when the demand is more inelastic than the supply. By the way, also, it's not always this way. So one of the things that students get confused about, they go, well, they make some generalizations, right? They think, okay, if demand is inelastic, then the consumers will pay more of a tax. That's not true, because technically I could draw it where both the demand and the supply are inelastic and they end up sharing the tax equally. It's all relative. If the demand is relatively more inelastic than the supply, then yes, consumers pay more of that tax. By the way, if I'm totally like above your head, I'm sorry. There's a unit summary video that summarizes all of Unit 2 microeconomics, and I go over this. I actually show all the possible combinations of this, showing a demand curve when it's perfectly inelastic, when it's relatively inelastic, when it's unit elastic, when it's relatively elastic, and when it's perfectly elastic, and then showing you what a tax looks like on all those. So obviously, I'm just giving you a little bit of information here. If I'm above your pay grade, I apologize, but that's the idea I want you to remember, because you've hopefully learned all this stuff in your class. You're trying to get it back in your brain. Here we go. Now we've got that down. Calculate the consumer surplus if consumers can get this product. Okay, we're switching gears again. For this one, let's go back to this tax. understand that, number one, consumer surplus after this tax would be here. It looks like I'm not going to ask you that question, but you should understand where it is. You should also understand this idea that producer surplus after this tax would be here. That's producer surplus. And you should also understand the idea of deadweight loss would be that triangle. Now, again, I'm not asking you to do those calculations in these questions, but you should be able to do those. We've practiced them kind of earlier. So the AP test, I mean, think about it this way. The AP test, your college class, your professor could ask you so many questions on a tax. Think about all the questions I asked. So stay with me here. Equilibrium was right there. First question was, if there's a $2 tax, what's the price and quantity? Okay. If there's a $2 tax, how much is the tax revenue? Those are the two questions that I asked you, right? If, who pays the tax incidence, I could ask you that. And then I could ask you, calculate the consumer surplus, calculate the producer surplus, and then calculate the deadweight loss from this tax, which I did not ask you, but you should be able to do in the first place. Okay, that said, let's go here. Calculate the consumer surplus, because now we're switching gears again. So review, because I like doing this, because I want you to see there's a method to my madness. Supply and demand, do you understand how it shifts? Calculating consumer surplus at equilibrium, calculating consumer surplus, understand the idea of deadweight loss, calculating consumer surplus with a ceiling, or in this case, ceiling, but a floor, understanding government intervention. This one was understanding how to do the same thing for taxes. Now we're switching gears for number 25, and only number 25 if there is a world price, right? We're talking about international trade like we did earlier. So here we go. You probably know where it is. The question is, can you calculate it? So the question here, calculate the consumer surplus if the consumers can get this product at a world price of $7. There's $7. The quantity supplied is going to be here. That's the quantity domestically supplied. The quantity that is demanded is here. Normally we said there would be a shortage. We're going to fill that shortage with imports. So the amount we're going to import, in fact, I'll write it off to the side. We're going to import 60 units of whatever this is. So this 60 units we're going to bring in from the country. The question is, where is consumer surplus? Well, you know that. You know where it is. Consumer surplus includes this whole area, right? It's all these people who couldn't buy it before now can get it. Consumer surplus. And you understand this is producer surplus and there's no deadweight loss. The question is, can you do the actual calculation? So there it is. There's your question. Calculate the consumer surplus. Here it is. So it's 15. I'm just doing this little part. You don't really need to do this. You can skip this part. 15 down to 7, right? So I'm just going to say, okay, equals 8. So that's $8. Okay, so $8 is the height. So $8 times the base, which is 8 times 80, right? All cut in half, divided by 2, right? So it's the height, which we said was $8, times the base, which is 80, all divided by 2, cut in half. And so that is 8 times 40, that is $320, right? $320 is the area of this consumer surplus. How do you guys feel about that? You feel good about that? How you doing? You doing okay? You sure? Okay, that is the area of consumer surplus. Done. There you go. Again, you spotted it earlier, right? We spotted it when we did this. You know where it is. The next step is actually to calculate it and understand this idea. All right, we're now switching gears completely. When I say switching gears, I mean totally switching gears to something we haven't done yet. We're talking now about elasticity. I did talk about elasticity a second ago when I talked about, these tax incidents, but now I'm talking about the calculations. Now, I've made tons of videos about this idea. Understand, and by the way, try these questions that I'm talking right now. In fact, I'm going to take you off my screen. There's 4 types of elasticity to give you an overview. There's price elasticity of demand, there's price elasticity of supply, there's cross-price elasticity of demand, and income elasticity of demand. Those are the ones you have to know for an introductory microeconomics class. You have to understand the calculations and the equations. The most important thing I want you to understand is, for the equation, it's almost always the same. It's the percent change in quantity divided by percent change in the price. It's not the raw. So if the price went from 10 to 12, you don't go, it's 2, it's the percent change from 10 to 12, or 20%, right? So when we're talking about percent change is the equation. Now, it's the same equation for all 4 of these, but it just kind of changes what quantity and what price you're looking at. You know, for demand and supply, it's easy. It's changing the price of the product and changing the quantity demanded, right? For the price elasticity demand. Changing the price and the quantity supplied for supply elasticity. Changing the price of one product affecting the quantity of a different product. That's cross price. And changing the price of, not the price, it's income affecting the quantity. Again, I made videos that cover this. That's more of an overview. I'm actually stalling as you guys practice some of these. So go ahead and let's calculate this. The one thing I want to point out really quick is that show your work is absolutely key. You've got to make sure you show your work. The AP test, I think this year, I'll make some predictions in May if you're an AP student on what I think the AP test is going to be. But I have no doubt that they're going to ask you some elasticity questions and they're going to force you to actually calculate it, because that's something you really can't cheat on, especially if they say show your work. You can't, whatever you write, you got to make sure you understand. So here we go. Calculate the elasticity. There's another equation I want to point out. In fact, I'm going to write it over here. And I'll actually write it up here. So when we're talking about percent change, that's one of the ones I want you to understand. It's the old minus the new divided by the old. Old. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, it's ugly. It's the old number, so where you were, where you started, minus the new number, so where you ended up, divided by the old number, technically times 100. This gives you percent change. Right, so we'll just do it. So I won't just give you examples of this. Let's actually start it up. We're using this equation. We're using this equation to find the elasticity of demand coefficient. First thing I want you to watch out for, are they asking for so demand, supply, cross price, or income? So make sure you know ahead of time what you're actually looking for. In this case, between price 10 and 9. So from 10 to 9, and I can give you different ranges. Is there a reason why that stopped working? I can give you different ranges. Give me a second here, guys. Okay. I can give you different ranges. So I can say, okay, how about down here from 5 or from 6 to 5? That's important. No memory. You forgot all your elasticity. I've got no memory. I forgot this stuff. So I'm just throwing this out now. Where you are on the demand curve or the supply curves matter. From this case, I say, so I can't just say, oh, what's the elasticity demand coefficient? If I asked you that, there'd be multiple right answers because there are multiple answers you can get. If I said maybe from here to here, it would be a different number. So be careful on this. Make sure you understand from 10 to 9, from here to here, that's the only calculation we're doing. Also, your professor or your teacher, for the most part, they shouldn't be giving you like questions or like super hard. This shouldn't be from like $10 to $11.28 or something like that. They're going to be whole numbers. They're going to be easy to calculate. 10, 20, 30, 40, 50% kind of stuff. So I'm going into it, know that. Here we go. Let's actually answer this. Make sure you feel comfortable. I'm leaving the graph a little bit so you can see it. But here we go. Calculate the elasticity demand between 10 and 9. First of all, let's do the percent change in quantity. So in quantity, we went from 50 to 60. The old number was 50. Minus the new number 60 divided by the new number 50 times 100 equals. So this is, basically hold on. The old number, this should be a positive number, not a negative number. Where am I messing up here? This old number minus the new number. What's going on here? Quantity increased. Anyways, so 10 is what percent of 50? We know this is 20%, okay? So in this case, I'm super confused. I don't know why I shouldn't be. It's new minus the old. This should be a negative number. Why are you negative? Why are you negative? We know it increased. So I'm sorry if I'm getting myself tripped up here. Oh, I know why. Yeah. It's the percent change. Okay, so the demand coefficient, between 10 and 9, we know the percent change in quantity is going to be an increase of 20%. Can you see that? You can't see a darn thing. So I'm filling out this equation down here, the elasticity demand coefficient, and I'm running out of room. So we know that quantity increased from 5 to 50 to 60, which is an increase of 20%. So 50 to 60 is an increase of 20%. And the way it got there, price fell from 10 to 9. From 10 to 9 was a decrease of 10%. Now you can rewrite this obviously as, 0.2 over negative 0.1. And then you end up with the idea that this is negative. And this is the key to this. This is going to be a -2 is the elasticity of demand coefficient. Now that negative is key. I want you to always understand, and this is the key to this. Understand the elasticity of demand coefficient is always negative. It has to, because this is the inverse relationship between price and quantity. In other words, when the price went down, the quantity went up, right? So -2 is the price elasticity demand coefficient. You also understand that this means that this is elastic or relatively elastic demand curve, right? Now, this would be a completely different number, right? And you can calculate if you want to between these 2 points. If I said, okay, price increased from 5 to 6, calculate the elasticity of demand, and you'd find out that that number is something different. It is not -2, and this number actually would show you the demand's inelastic. So the demand is elastic between this range, but it's inelastic between this range, which seems weird, but just remember, elasticity is not the same as slope. So if you think, oh, elasticity is slope, sounds like the same thing. It's just the rise over run or whatever. It's not that concept at all, because we're talking about percent change. So there you go. The answer was -2. Let's do the same thing now for supply between 10 and 12. 10 and 12, between this distance here, it went from 50 to 70. 50, now I'm doing some of this in my head. 50 to 70 is an increase of 20, but that's not the percent change, right? That's the raw change. 20 is a total of 40% of 50. So we know that 40% is the increase in the quantity from 50 to 70. And we know price increase from 10, you can't see that, from 10 to 12, that's an increase of price of 20%. So from, if you 0.4 divided by 0.2 gives you 2. Notice it's the same exact elasticity as the demand, except it's positive. And that's why I threw that in there. This one will always be positive. Elasticity of supply has to be, because the relationship between price and quantity supplied, right? Positive slope, positive idea, understand this is, now it's also elastic as well. So you understand that the supply in this case is also elastic, at least in that range. All right, done. Now we're switching gears. So these two, we're talking about elasticity demand, elastic supply, do the calculations. In this one, I'm giving you the equation. One of the things you can do on the AP test is write this equation and then do this process. It might ask you, and it might be a good idea to go through this whole process and show them how you actually got, 20%. Like I know, when price went up from when quantity increased from 50 to 70, that's 40%. But you can show them this idea, the old number was 50, the new number is 70, and then divide that by 50. You can actually write that equation to help them out as well. Now we're going to the other type of elasticity, which is elasticity, cross-price elasticity. In fact, it says it right here, cross-price elasticity. Remember, this tells you the difference between if two goods are substitutes or complements. So for this one, it's the same equation as before. It's a percent change in price of one product affecting the quantity of a completely different product. If they're positive, they're substitutes. If they're negative, they're complements. Right? In this case, it didn't matter. Right? Negative, demand's always negative, so supply is always positive. Now the sign actually matters. If it's positive or negative, actually matters and gives you information. So here we go. Assume the price fell from 10 to 8, causing the quantity demanded of a different product, there's your key, to increase from 10 to 20. Okay, here we go. Assume the price fell. So here's the key. Price fell. In fact, let me do the quantity first because of the equation. So quantity increased from 10 to 20. That's a 20% increase in the quantity. Okay? That's not hard to do. Easy numbers. From 100 to 120 is 20% increase. That was caused from a decrease, and that's the key, a decrease from 10 to 8, which is a 20% decrease. So this is -1. -1 is the cross-price elasticity between whatever this good and some other good that, when the price fell, it affected the other one. Now, why does this matter again? These two things are complements, right? That makes sense because if you think about it, if the price falls for this product, you can't see again, if the price falls for this product and people buy more of the other one, right? So those two things clearly are complements. Price goes down, people go, oh, cool, I'm gonna go buy the other one too. So even if you didn't know how to calculate cross-price elasticity, at the very least, understanding price falling here, leading to an increase in the quantity of the other product, told you, oh, these two things must be complements. That logic should get you maybe a second point if they ask, are they complements or substitutes? But you understand -1 is the cross-price elasticity. This is not the same as unit elastic. If you know the idea of unit elastic, right? So, elasticity, if it's 1, so there's elastic if it's greater than 1. I'm switching gears again. I'm saying that a lot today. So if it's the elasticity of demand coefficient is greater than 1, it's elastic. If it's less than 1, it's inelastic. If it's 1, it's unit elastic. This is not that same concept at all, right? This is -1. That tells you it's a substitute. It's not unit elastic. That's not a concept when it comes to cross-price elasticity. Okay, last one. Assume instead that demand changes in such a way. Ooh, great question. We're going back to the graph. Assume instead that the demand changes in such a way that a decrease in supply results in the equilibrium price and quantity of 12 and 50. So now $12.50 is right here. So the demand has changed in such a way to where supply, when it shifts to the left, oh, you can't see again. When supply shifts to the left, we're going to bring at price 12 and quantity 50, which means this demand curve, the only way to pull that off is making this demand curve, totally vertical. So this demand curve has changed in such a way, I'm going to write D1 for this particular question, question 29. So this old demand curve, and this is getting ugly, I'm sorry. This demand curve has now disappeared because it changed in such a way where now when supply decreases, the price is 12, quantity is 50. We have now a vertical demand curve, a perfectly inelastic demand curve. And the question is, calculate the elasticity of demand coefficient when the demand curve is vertical. The answer is it's 0. This is perfectly inelastic demand. And the only way that's possible is because the quantity stayed exactly the same. And the reason why it's 0 is because, look at the equation, right? Look at the equation. Percent change in quantity divided by percent change in price. Yes, the price increased 20%, but the quantity didn't change at all. It was 50 and it stayed at 50, right? So if the demand curve is vertical, there is no change in the quantity. And if there's no change in quantity, there's no percent change in the quantity. And that means that the elasticity of demand coefficient is 0. Does that make any sense? Since I'm here, I might as well show you if there was a tax, let's say the reason why there was this shift, the old price was here. Again, this is getting super ugly. Just ignore this old demand curve. So the price was here. Let's assume there's a tax. And let's say the new price is right here and the quantity stays exactly the same. That box right there, this box is the tax revenue, right? You see it? That's the tax revenue that would exist. The question is, who pays that tax revenue? Where's the incidence of tax? That tax box comes straight on the shoulders of consumers. Consumers would pay all of this tax revenue because the price was 10, and then after supply shift, the new price is 12. It's a $2 tax. That $2 tax is paid entirely by consumers. And that might actually help you understand this concept a little better too. Earlier, I showed you when there was a tax, right? It was, consumers paid portion and producers paid a portion. In this situation, right here, the price was at 10. The new price is 12. The producers still get 10, right? They got 10 in the beginning. After the tax, they still get 10. They don't have to pay any of this tax. This tax all is being paid by the consumers. Now, by the way, add these all up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15. Let me know in the comments below how you did on the second page. So a brand new number out of 15, 15 out of 15, whatever you got. Let me know how you actually did. I'm going to look at those comments. Make sure it's on the comments, not on the chat. And the chat's good because I could see it now, but I want to see it in the comments below on YouTube because that'll help me go back and figure out what I have to cover. If you got all these right, and none of these wrong, then I'll go back and make sure you covered just that specific concept of identifying things. But this was hard. I want to point out this was like legit hard stuff what I just covered with you. We're not done yet. I know you want to be like, oh, we're done. We're not done. We're not done. I know I'm close, but I'm not there yet. I also gave you this. I guarantee your teacher in your class, if you got to it, also gave you this for your response. This is straight from the AP test. This is free on the College Board website. This is the 2015 micro for your response, question number 3. Basically, it's asking you all these things over again. So if you're thinking, okay, Mr. Clifford, I think I get this stuff. I mean, I understand where things are on the graph. I understand how to find them on the graph. You know, I think I understand how to calculate them on the graph. There's no better way to practice than with an actual free response, because this is the level you need to be able to understand it. And by the way, if you're not an AP student, you're a college student, they get all this stuff from college professors. So this is exactly the level that you're going to be asked as well. Try this free response on your own. This is from the 2015 test. This asks you the same exact concepts. The only thing that I didn't really cover much was this idea of total surplus. So understand, total surplus is both triangles added together. So I don't know if I talked much about that. So there's consumer surplus, there's producer surplus, add them together, that's total surplus. So, it talks about total producer surplus in this one, but I think later on it asks you about total surplus. Basically, can you identify this stuff? Notice it's everything we just did. So if you're thinking like, do I know what I'm supposed to know? This is all of it. If you go through this free response, you'd find out. It's asked you, identify consumer surplus. Here comes a ceiling. The next one, it talks about having, more stuff with a ceiling. And then in this case, it has a quota. So if you limit output, what's the deadweight loss look like? Then it's going to ask you to calculate some elasticity stuff. And the good news is, you know this stuff. You get this stuff. The tricky things we said, like I said in this section, were understanding, not just where to find this stuff, but actually how to calculate it. So the second page was probably the harder of them. I don't know how you guys did, but if you did 15 out of 15, you're absolutely, totally amazing, because this stuff's pretty darn tricky. Anyways, make sure you do me a couple favors. First thing, do me a favor, please like this video. If you like my videos and you think they're helpful, please also subscribe. Know that I'm going to make more videos this entire month to help you guys out. Next one is on Wednesday. It's Macroeconomics Unit 2. I'll be talking about GDP, how to calculate that, unemployment, inflation, GDP deflator, CPI, all that stuff. Same sort of thing. I'll have a practice sheet uploaded and ready to go for you. I want to thank you so much for watching my videos. It means so much to me. Normally we have time to do some live questions where you can ask me questions. I'm not going to do that this time because I don't want to go over the time limit. I want to do these for about an hour and a half at the very most. But I want to thank you so much for watching my videos. I know that a lot of you guys are freaked out because you're not in class. I'm going to keep making videos like this to help you out. These are just ones I'm doing in April. Remember, I'm going to make a whole new set for May to get you ready for this new AP test if you're an AP student, specifically for what I think is going to be on the AP test and the way that they're not going to ask a lot of graph questions. So I'm going to help you guys out with that as well. As always, thanks for watching my stuff. If you haven't already done so, seriously, you should totally get the Ultimate Review Packet. It's going to help you learn, and it's a great way of saying thank you for making these free videos. You guys rock. Do me a favor, also, take a look at the Calculus Ultimate Review Packet, Human Geography. Tell your friends about the World Ultimate Review Packet. Those are all going to help yourself and your friends learn as well. Thanks so much for watching. You know exactly what I'm about to tell you right now. I always tell you the same thing at the end of my videos until... I'm trying to get it ready so I can do it. Okay, here we go. Until next time.